Hello everyone, this is PK Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video for you, and this will be a non-spoiler review of Thor Love and Thunder. Released on June the 8th, 2022, it stars Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, Tesa Thompson, Bale, Russell Crowe, and it was directed by Taika Wahtiti. Now, Thor Love and Thunder overall is the 29th entry within the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the 4th film within the Thor franchise, after the first movie Thor in 2011, Thor the Dark World in 2013, and Thor Ragnarok in 2017. Now, the story of Thor Love and Thunder is that we are catching up with Thor, the powerful Asgardian, getting back into shape after the events of Avengers Endgame, having further adventures in space with the Guardians of the Galaxy. He faces a new threat in the being known as Gorr the Butcher, who wants to kill all of the gods within the universe. We also see the return of Thor's ex-girlfriend Jane Foster, who is suffering from cancer yet has found a way to wield Mjolnir, which as we all know is Thor's signature weapon. Alongside the king of New Asgard, Valkyrie, they all team up together to prevent Gorr from destroying all of the gods. Now, I've stated in previous coverage of this film that whether you like it or not will completely depend on how you liked Thor Ragnarok. That sequel was a massive box office success and was seen as a reinvigoration of the character and franchise. So it made sense in many ways that Marvel would follow in the same direction with this entry, and all of the trailers suggested very much so. And that's most definitely the case, as they've clearly doubled down on Ragnarok's more light-hearted comedic tone. And unfortunately, as somebody who didn't like Thor Ragnarok, this has resulted in a very lackluster and underwhelming effort this time round. Now, I'm not saying that this movie had to be very grim and dark, but the overemphasis on comedy here is too much. It's just too much. They've overdosed on all of the humour and the jokey approach, and it's taken away so much potential from the overall movie. We're constantly getting one-liners and punchlines and jokey sequences all the time throughout the film, where it becomes a bit draining to watch after a while, especially when 90% of the time the humour doesn't land. And even if you're somebody who felt that the humour does land, it's not enough to hide the film's very rushed and uneven pace. We're constantly jumping across multiple locations so quickly that nothing of any substance truly lands or leave any significant impact or impression, minus perhaps the dramatic final confrontation and maybe perhaps the opening passage of the film. Now, the story, if there is actually one, is so lightweight, and it seems halfway through that everybody involved forgot about the main plot or the goal of the characters, as they got too caught up on themselves, having too much of a playful good time, thinking things are funnier than what they actually are throughout this film. Now, it's also clear that director Wahtiti and star Hemsworth clearly favoured this more direction in terms of tone, but when you take it this far, it really robs the movie of any stakes or tension. It literally does feel like a live-action cartoon for a 5-year-old audience and for nobody else. At the very least, in Ragnarok, there was a striking, eye-catching aesthetic. There was lots of fizz and eye-popping visuals that to an extent compensated for the overuse in comedy. But this film here, there is so much weak CGI and green screen effects, and nothing stands out in particular in terms of the action sequences when they do happen. A lot of the time it's very incoherent. There's one scene in particular when they attack Gorr on a moon, where you can really see the inferior quality in terms of the CGI effects, and sometimes the sequences don't even look fully finished or rendered. Now, in terms of the performances, all of the actors are fine here. For all of the scrutiny and criticism surrounding the inclusion of Lady Thor, Natalie Portman actually does very well here as the character. There's absolutely no issues in terms of the way that she looks, in terms of her costume, or indeed her physical shape in terms of the character. She doesn't undermine or dominate Thor as many feared. There's no element of identity politics or the so-called MCU here. Lady Thor is very prominent, but at the same time, she's constantly supporting Thor throughout the adventure. And Natalie Portman actually does very well when we get little hints in terms of the suffering of cancer. But as mentioned before, anytime we want to strive towards far more emotional weight, it's constantly undercut by the jokey approach. We then talk about Powell as Gore. Again, a lot of excitement was here when we saw that he was included within this film as the villain, but sadly that potential is never fully realised. Apart from the opening and closing scenes, he just comes across as yet again another generic phase 1 villain, all one note, all one tone. And there are certain times when, again, he's very hokey in terms of his delivery. And again, I think this was more of a case of the direction and the instruction given to him rather than his overall acting ability. And it's just so unfortunate here that we could have had a villain that was one of the strongest within the MCU, but given this direction here, it just takes away a lot of the intensity that you'd want to see from the likes of Christian Bale within this role. We then talk about Chris Hemsworth, who I've said on many occasions is an absolutely fantastic comic book casting in the role as Thor. Regardless of the movies that he's in, he's always managed to project the charisma and the swagger and very much of that godlike being that we would associate with the character. But where Thor Ragnarok gave him far more room to exhibit more charisma, in this movie here they've just taken it too far, and this time Thor comes across much more buffoonerish, almost clownish in many ways, like he's almost doing a constant stand-up comedy routine. And we see him throughout many sequences where he's crashing into buildings and crashing into walls, all uncoordinated. And it's such a disappointing regression of the character when we look back in Infinity War, which perfectly captured the swagger alongside the awesomeness and the gravitas that we should get with a character like Thor. To see him regressed here, and also where we saw with Avengers Endgame, it's just so unfortunate. And regardless of how good Chris Hemsworth is within the role, this type of direction just proves detrimental to the character. Now, as I've said, the opening and closing scenes are the only moments of any weight, alongside some references towards Jane and her cancer. And if we had 30 or 40% more of these elements, we could have had something good or even something truly special. But sadly, what we've ended up here is something that is truly generic, very much of a half effort here, and dare I say almost somewhat of a lazy installment. It's almost as if they were just relying on the tone of Ragnarok, and they felt if we just double down on that type of tone, that'll be enough to make sure that the film has equal amounts of success. But even if you are a fan of Marvel, or just indeed an audience member in general, I truly feel we deserve something far more better and something far more special here. And if Thor ends up getting a fifth movie, I think we really need a change of direction, pace and overall vision. So sadly, if I had to give a score for Thor Love and Thunder, I would give it a 4.9 out of 10. Now, of course, we all know the routine right now. There's 2 end credit scenes as usual, if you want to stay for the end of them both. And of course, I'll expand on them much more in my spoiler review, which I'll upload shortly after this video. But just quickly, I would say neither of them really proved to be particularly exciting. I don't really get a lot of the reviews that I'm hearing here that are constantly hyping up all of the end credit scenes that we've seen throughout Phase 4, because in my opinion, nearly all of them have proved to be very underwhelming, and it probably provides a further discussion later on down the line where exactly Phase 4 is going, and does Marvel even know the direction they're heading in prior to building the eventual connections that will see both the likes of Fantastic Four and X-Men come into the overall universe. But in terms of Thor and Love and Thunder, I just think it's a very disappointing and lazy entry for a truly great character and interpretation. Whilst it's good on one hand to see Thor getting a 4th movie extending the likes of both Captain America and Iron Man, as of course he was one of the original 3 within Phase 1, if it continues in this direction, I really think there should be a stoppage at this stage, and we should try and move it on from the character overall if they're not going to put in much effort in terms of his overall installments. So those are my overall thoughts and feelings and review of Thor Love and Thunder. Let me know what you think in the comments below. As I mentioned before, I will be providing a spoiler review where I will go into far more depths as to what I felt worked and what didn't work as well within the overall movie. But let me know what you think in the comments below. If you do indeed feel this is a natural improvement of Ragnarok, do you think it's a further ingression? How do you feel Phase 4 is going so far? Do you think Thor Love and Thunder is up there in terms of the best movies, or do you think it's below there as one of the worst, not only in terms of Phase 4, but in terms of the entirety of the MCU as well? Let me know what you think in the comments. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.